So, all right, let me start anyway. We'll get the clicker working. So let me start this with a story. Both sidelines were cheering as Jake Porter ran onto the football field. You might think it's odd that both sidelines would cheer for a person running onto a field, but what you don't realize is Jake was special. You see, Jake had a form of a Down syndrome, severe learning disability. He couldn't read. He could barely write his name. But Jake, he loved football. And when he went into high school, his dad talked to the coach and asked, is there a way that Jake can be a part of the team? Because he absolutely loves football. So they decided to make him the team manager. Well, Jake grew to be so much more than the team manager very quickly. You see, Jake grew to embody the entire spirit of the program. Jake loved the team. And the team, they loved him back. Jake never missed a game. Matter of fact, Jake never even missed a practice. Well, he went through his high school years, and now it's his senior year. And the coach, he wants to do something special for Jake. So he dresses out. For this game, Jake's got the helmet, the shoulder pads, the cleats, everything. For this game, he's part of the team. Well, then the miracle happens. You see, things didn't go well for the home team that night, Jake's team. As a matter of fact, the game was a blowout. The home team was losing 42-0. And time is running out. There's just a few seconds left in the game. And the coach gets an idea, so he calls timeout. And he runs out onto the field and he talks to the referee. And then he runs over to the opposing coach. And after a conversation, he runs back to the sidelines. And the next thing you know, both sidelines are cheering as Jake runs onto the football field. Now, Jake, he knows exactly what he's supposed to do. The coach was crystal clear. Coach said, now, Jake, here's what's going to happen. The quarterback's going to take the ball, going to take the snap. He's going to turn around. He's going to give it to you. And as soon as he gives it to you, go down on one knee. The referee will blow the whistle. Time will expire, and the game will be over. Jake said, got it, coach. And he sprints into the huddle. Well, just like the coach said, the quarterback takes the ball, turns around, he hands it to Jake. Jake starts just like he's told to go down on one knee. But his teammates, they hold him up and say, no, run, run. Jake is startled for a second. He doesn't know what to do, so he starts to run the wrong way. So the referee stops him and turns around and says, no, Jake, run that way. And when Jake hits that line of scrimmage, it parts like the Red Sea. Jake is running for all he's worth. Players from both teams are encouraging, shouting encouragement. People in the stands realize something special is happening. The harder Jake runs, the further Jake runs, the louder the place gets. He crosses the 20, the 15, the 10, the 5, and when Jake Porter crosses the end zone, the place goes wild. Now, the home team lost 42-6 that evening. But as Jake's teammates carried him off on their shoulder, he was smiling like a kid who had just won the Super Bowl. Rick Riley of Sports Illustrated called this the play of the year. The local hometown's newspaper said it was the touchdown heard around the world. Now, my question is this. What is it about a story like that we love? What is it about a story like that touches something deep within us? I mean, why do we feel that way? Well, I believe part of the answer is that deep, deep down, we all want to be part of a world where kids like Jake Porter score touchdowns. I believe that deep down, we want to be part of a world that's not ruled by the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, or the richest. I think deep down, we want to be part of a world that's dominated by grace. A world that's dominated by love. But that's not the kind of world we live in, is it? I mean, when we see grace and love extended to a person like Jake, it touches us. We feel it. But why do we care? Why do we care? I think intuitively, all of us know that there's more to us than biology. There's more to you than flesh and bone and brains and tendons. There's more. You're more than a stimulus and response machine. You see, there's part of you that is beyond natural. I mean, nature is survival of the fittest. I mean, the grizzly bear in Yellowstone has no problem whatsoever taking down the cute baby elk or the old sick moose. Stories like this touch us because there's more to us than nature. There's part of you, there's part of me that is beyond natural, beyond the physical, more than what we can touch and what we can see. But where did that come from? How did it happen? How did we get here? How did this become part of who we are? If indeed we conclude that we are more than nature, what are the implications? I mean, could we have gotten to where we are by purely natural, unguided processes over billions of years? Is that possible? What about this idea of evil? Where does it come from? How do we know what's actually evil? And finally, is there any hope? Folks, these are the questions that we're going to explore over the coming 4 weeks. And there's no better place to start than in the beginning. The Genesis account of the first day goes something like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form, void. Darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw the light that it was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. The light he called day, and the darkness he called night. There was evening, and there was morning, the first day. What a really interesting way to start a very, very long story, a complicated story, a challenging story, I think, if we're honest with ourselves. So welcome to our study. If you all want to speak to me during this, that would be awesome. It'd be better for you and it would be better for me. So if I throw out a question, don't treat it as rhetorical. If you have an opinion, throw it out there, okay? So over the coming weeks, we're going to look at some of the foundational events of history. We're going to explore some of the basically, I believe, seemingly simple questions that I believe have profound implications for how we live. We're going to talk about what I believe are some interesting topics. We're going to discuss a lot of facts, but facts that we use to understand the context of the gospel message. If you engage in this study, really engage in this study, I'm confident that you're going to come away with a practical understanding of why you believe what you say you believe. Or maybe there's someone in here or more than one that's a skeptic. Maybe you're not a skeptic yet, but maybe you're starting to have doubts about all this Christian stuff. Could it really be real? Well, engage in this study, and I'm confident that you're going to come away with a reason to connect or maybe to reconnect with the faith of your youth. All right? So engage. This is not one of those studies. If you were here for my introduction, I said, sometimes I've gone into a church setting and I felt like I was being asked to check my rational mind at the door. Just come in and listen. Listen, don't question. That's not this kind of study. I want you to think deeply about where you come from. I want you to think about those implications. And I want you to think critically about what you hear. It's happened once or twice before, say something that you scratch your head about. And say, I don't know if I exactly see it that way. You know what? That's fantastic. Okay? I'm not asking you to agree with me. But I am asking you to know why you believe what you say you believe. That's what got me through my college years. Let me take a brief aside here. Some of you know I went to college. I left home at 18, went to college, a church kid. I went to church. My family, I was in the church every time the doors were open, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Okay, solid youth group, the whole 9 yards. And I barely had enough to survive the college experience. Almost from day one, you will have professors that challenge your faith indirectly. They begin with an assumption that there is no God. And then they go on to explain how you came to be by purely natural, unguided processes. And very quickly I had to decide, what do I really believe? Not what mom and dad believed, not what my grandmother believed. What did I really believe? And the reality is, those days in the 1980s were the genesis of what I'm here to talk to you about today. All right? So let's talk a little bit about the context of the way I view Genesis. And I'm going to tell you right now about a perspective that's taken me decades to get to. You have to decide whether this works for you or not. But I've come to the conclusion that Genesis is more about introducing us to our Creator than it is telling us the details of how He created everything. Okay? Now, Genesis does give us some of the hows, but I think the most important part is introducing us to God, our Creator, His nature, and we're going to hit some of that tonight. How He chose to do it, I've concluded over a long period of time, how He chose to do it is less important than the fact that He did it. Okay? Let me say that one more time because I think it's really important. The fact that He created heaven and earth and everything in it is more important than how He chose to do it. And what I've seen is some friends and family that stumble over Genesis. And the reason this series is titled Finding Jesus in Genesis is I try to get people, when we're talking about this subject, to Jesus as quickly as possible. Now, because you can get into debates that take you nowhere about 6 literal days or 6 eons of time. That's less important than God created the heaven and the earth. You may disagree with that, okay? That's the perspective that I've come to. So in Genesis, we are introduced to a God who created all things. We're introduced to a God who saves, a God who redeems, a God who delivers, and thankfully, a God who never gives up on us. He gave us the ability and the freedom to choose, and then He honors our choices. And then, when we choose badly, He is willing to do whatever it takes to reestablish the relationship with Him. So let's look at some of the hows as recorded in Genesis. But we're going to also talk about what can we learn about the nature of God. So today we're going to cover the first day of creation, and I promise the rest of it will go much, much faster. But I think we got to build some context here. So if you've got a Bible or a smartphone, we're going to start in Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning of what? The beginning of what? What do you think? Clue. I believe this is the beginning of time. The beginning of time. You see, God exists outside of time. Now, this is a hard thing for us to get our minds around. I mean, God can look forward in time. He can look backwards in time. He can look above it. He can look under it. But God exists outside of time. We, on the other hand, we see time in one dimension. I mean, we can remember what happened in the past, but we can't go back in time as much as we would want to go back in time for certain things. But God exists outside of time. So we see the present as this infinitely thin sliver of time that separates our past from our future. In the beginning is the beginning, I believe, of time itself. Now, a really quick, brief aside that I think is really important. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence that today we divide time by the life of Jesus. Before Christ, BC, after Christ, AD. Today is 2019 years after Christ was on the earth. So, whether you're a Christian, Jew, Hindu, Buddhist, atheist, whatever you are, you're counting time from the life of a poor, obscure Jewish carpenter that was born in a remote outpost of the Roman Empire. That just doesn't happen without a purpose. That just doesn't happen without coincidence. So in the beginning, I believe, is the beginning of time. And if you want to look toward the end of the book, in Revelation, you'll see time runs out. Time will be no more. God said, I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. So here we have in the beginning of time. In the beginning, let's look at the next word, God. This is the Hebrew word Elohim. Elohim, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Remember I said that one of the purposes of Genesis is to introduce us to our Creator, to His nature. And I think by the name here, we're starting to see something about our Creator. Elohim, the I am on the end of that word, can actually be translated gods, plural. It's a plural noun. But the verb that's used in this in the Hebrew is a singular verb, so it's translated correctly. Don't kick me out just yet. But I think the fact that Elohim, maybe you're telling us something about his nature. Maybe he's a single God with multiple parts. Maybe. We'll talk more about that as we progress. In the beginning, God created. This is the Hebrew word bara, meaning something from nothing. Only God can create something from nothing. So a lot of us have these computers in our pocket, right? And we sometimes say, well, Steve Jobs created the iPhone. Well, not really. He invented the iPhone. What do I mean by that? Well, he took pre-existing materials and put them together in a really innovative way. So that kind of reminds me, are you allowed to tell a joke up here? Okay, so in college I was told a joke about two scientists, and apologies to the front row here, that this is far in the future, and they said, we figured this thing out. We know how to create a human being just like God did. And so they approached God and they said, we're going to challenge you. We can do exactly what you did. And God said, okay, go for it. So they went out and they gathered up some dirt to create the first man out of. And God said, whoa, what are you doing? They said, well, you created man out of the dust of the ground, so we got some dust. And God said, whoa, go get your own dirt. So only God, if we take Genesis seriously, can create something from nothing. Okay. In the beginning, God created the heavens. The heavens. What do you think that is? Is that God's home? Just the stars and the planets? Now, I think what's being referred to here, if you think about the container for which God is going to put the rest of his creation, I think that's what's referred to here. And I've got this empty cube that kind of symbolizes this. This, for our purposes, is heavens. The empty box for which God is going to put his creation. So again, think outer space with nothing in it. Okay? Earth. What's that? It's not the planet. When we read this casually, we tend to think this is the planet that we're all spinning around on right now. But I think what this is being referred to are actually all of the basic elements that will be used to form everything else later on in the creation story. Because remember, the next verse, if you're reading ahead, is the earth was without form, void. So it had no form, it had no structure. So I think what this is telling us is that in the beginning, God created the heavens, the container, the earth, the basic raw materials of matter. So if the PowerPoint had worked, I actually had the periodic table of elements. I spent 32 years at a chemical company. I didn't do any chemistry while I was there. There we go. So I think this is where these elements came out of nothing. So I've got these building blocks that represent that. So God is creating, the hydrogen, the oxygen, the gold, the platinum, all of the basic atoms and materials for which he would use to build the rest of creation. So I think if you go back to your grade school chemistry, you can take two of these hydrogen things and one of these oxygen things and put them together, and you get this liquid stuff that we require to live. How does that happen? That's chemistry. So I think in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But there's no structure here. So the thing I want you to get in your mind at this point in the creation story is a watery matrix just floating through space. Dark. No energy. Just sitting there. Waiting. What is it waiting on? Verse 2. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was on the face of the deep. And don't miss this next part. The Spirit of God, the Spirit of Elohim, is hovering over the face of the waters. So the word here that's translated hovering is translated different ways throughout Scripture. In other places it's shudder. Each time it's translated, it's referring to a back and forth motion. So I think a modern word that we could put here that would make sense would be vibrate. So what the picture that I get of this is the Spirit of God is providing energy into the newly created universe that has no structure. This, to me, my interpretation of this is where gravitational forces are activated. Materials start to come together to form planets and stars. This is where I believe math is invented. This is where the laws of physics are established. This is where chemistry is invented. through the energizing power of the Holy Spirit, or we'll call it for now the Spirit of Elohim. Okay? So in the first verse, we saw time, space, and matter. Three things that are codependent on one another. One doesn't exist without the other. So have you ever thought about what it was like before Genesis 1? Before there was anything? So I want you to put the Genesis account aside for just a moment. I want you to clear your mind. I want you to think about a time in the past, a time before you existed, a time before the oldest person that you know existed, before anybody in your family was born, a time before the oldest building you can think of was built, a time before there were people, a time before there was a planet, a time before there were stars, a time when there was literally nothing. It's kind of hard to think about, isn't it? Well, the question I want us to think about is, why is there something instead of nothing? Why is there something instead of nothing? I mean, there's really only two possible answers to this, right? Either the universe has always existed, or the universe has a starting point. Now, clearly Genesis says the universe had a starting point. But are there views that say the universe has always existed? Actually, if you go back to Aristotle, 4 BC, from Aristotle in 4 BC until the year 1927, fairly recently, the view of most religion and certainly science was that the universe didn't have a beginning, that matter in its most basic form has always existed. It didn't have a starting point. Yeah, they would say it changed and evolved over time, but matter, the universe, has always existed. That was the view until 1927. In the 1920s, Albert Einstein, you guys heard of Albert Einstein? Probably the most famous scientist ever, right? This was his view, along with the other scientists of the day. And there was also another scientist. His name was Edwin Hubble. You probably recognize the name. He was the guy that they named the Hubble Space Telescope after. Well, he spent a lot of time looking at the night sky. And what he began to observe is that the galaxies were all moving away from one another. And through a lot of observation, through a lot of complex things that I'm not capable of explaining to you, and a lot of complicated math, he came to the conclusion that it's not possible that the universe didn't have a beginning. His math showed that everything came together to a single point in time where everything began. He called it the singularity. And eventually, and I won't bore you with a story, but over a period of decades, that grew into what came to be known as the Big Bang Theory. Not the TV show, the astronomical theory that said clearly the universe had a starting point. Now, science today calls that the Big Bang. I call it the creation moment, documented in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. Okay. So why did I tell you that elaborate story? I believe this is an example of science pointing to God. There'll be people that will teach the topic that I'm up here talking to you today, and they will tell you that science and faith are not compatible. You believe one or you believe the other. I am about as far from that position as you can get. I believe with all my being that true science, done honestly, points to a creator. And I think us as Christians, and we have nothing to fear from science. Science points to a creator. Now, I don't want you to take my word for it. What I'm going to encourage you to do is to think about the foundation we're laying this week. Next week, we're going to look at some of the evidence. Next week, we're going to do a little bit of science. I can only do a little bit of science. We're going to do a little bit of math. It's going to be simple, easy to understand, I promise. But what we're going to discover next week was transformational for me. And I believe it will be transformational for you as well. Or for your teenage children or grandchildren when they start to have those really difficult, tough questions about what they're hearing in the world today. Okay? So, the earth was without, we've covered that. The earth was without form and void. The energizing power of the Holy Spirit energizing the entire universe. But now you have a universe with structure. You've got planets. You've got gravitational forces. But it's still dark. And then the next verse, this is a verse that I have spent, or a topic that I've spent considerable hours thinking about. I'm retired now, so what else do I have to do? So I'm thinking a lot about this. So the next verse is, I think we want to pause here and just reflect just a little bit. What we're about to read are the first recorded words of Elohim. The first recorded words of God. And being a firstborn child, I think there's something special about the first. Maybe not. My wife's a middle child. She'd probably disagree with that. We're going to hear the first recorded words of God. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Now, I got stuck here. I got stuck here because I do believe Scripture is inspired. But it looks to me things got out of order here. Because there's no sun yet. There's no stars yet. What is this light? What is it? Anybody got an opinion? I got a strong one. And you may disagree with me on this one. What is this light? God said, are we just talking about photons or something like that? What are we talking about here? Well, I'm not going to belabor it too much longer, but we're going to take the long way around here because I think this is really, really important. When I read, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and it talks about light coming into a dark universe, I can't help but go to the other in the beginning in Scripture. Some of you are ahead of me, and that is John 1. Let me read that to you. In the beginning was the Word. What's the Word? We're talking about Jesus Christ here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. So Jesus was not a created being. Jesus was with God always. Jesus is God. Okay, let me get that out of the way real quickly. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Don't miss this next part. In him, referring to Jesus, was life. And the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So I believe in Genesis 1, first day, we see a reference to Jesus Christ. being the light of the world. And if you think about the context, I mean, those words themselves are absolutely incredible to me. But if you think about the context in which John wrote those words, it becomes even more incredible. You see, and I don't want to, John is one of the four Gospels. John was likely written later, probably much later than the other three Gospels. It was written likely near the end of John's life. So think about all of the things that John saw before he wrote these words. It is very likely that John saw almost all of his friends martyred for this guy called Jesus. It's likely, not for sure, but it's likely that he saw the destruction of ancient Judaism in AD 70. Yet he writes, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. The light shines in the darkness. So the first spoken words of God create light. And in John 1, we see that this life of Jesus is the light of all mankind. That's why I call this Finding Jesus in Genesis. So this thing that God calls light, I think it's pretty special, don't you? I mean, if you've ever opened up a closet, a dark closet, you've uncovered a really important truth. And that's the truth that light always overtakes darkness. Darkness never overtakes light. So if darkness is spreading across our world, if darkness is spreading across this community, it's not because somebody went out to Center Street and opened up a big box of dark. Right? If darkness is spreading, it's because somebody is hiding the light. So I got a little candle up here that I use as an illustration. Let me just ask you a question. Let's say we turned out all the lights in this auditorium. Could it ever get dark enough in here that you couldn't see the light from this candle? Of course, you know the answer to that, right? As a matter of fact, it's exactly the opposite. The darker it gets, the brighter this light appears. Light always overtakes darkness. Darkness never overtakes light. Because I've had the privilege, I will say privilege, of seeing God's light shine in some really, really dark places. I've spent several 4-day weekends ministering to men in prison. I go in with a group called Kairos. And it's 42 men going in to minister to 42 of the inmates. And you go in and they're separated. Each of the men are 6 to 7 to a table. And there are a couple of us that go in that are assigned to the table to help facilitate discussion, because they have it's like they go through 12 sermons in 4 days. I mean, it's pretty intense. But you go through a sermon or a talk, they called it, and then you sing some, and then you have a group discussion, and we're there to help the discussion along. Well, it's my first time in, and I'm a duck out of water. Let me just be blunt about it. I've lived a very, very sheltered life. But I'm one of the people at a table that's supposed to help with the discussion, and this is my first time, and there's a man to my immediate left. I'm going to call him Mark. I'm not supposed to use his real name. If I say another name, that's his real name. But I'm going to call him Mark to the best of my ability. So Mark's to my left, and he's let's just say that Mark has done some horrific things in his life. Mark will never see the outside of a prison. But Mark is really influential within the prison community. As a matter of fact, he's a leader. He's a gang leader. So how do you know that? Well, you can tell by the way the other inmates interact with him. They serve him. They bring him things. They look to him to say, is it okay to do this? Or is it not okay to do this? He approves them going to the bathroom. Okay? Mark is a really hard man. So we start the process. He's sitting next to me and he's saying almost nothing. And there's a talk that's given on forgiveness. And during the table discussion, Mark doesn't say a word. And I know my job's to get him to talk. And I don't get him to talk. He's a pretty intimidating fellow. But, during the break, he comes up to me and he says, I've committed the unforgivable sin. Now, as a church kid, you probably know where my mind went. That wasn't where he was going at all. I said, Mark, what do you mean? He said, I've taken another man's life. That's unforgivable. In Mark's mind, he was beyond forgiveness of God or anybody else because of the things that he had done in his life. I didn't say anything else. I didn't know what to say. So there was another break, and the band was playing the song that I asked to be sung tonight, 10,000 Reasons. Not a song that you typically think of that a gang leader is going to respond to. But he come up to me and he said, hey, I kind of like that song. First indicator that Mark's heart was beginning to soften. So a little bit later, there was a talk on grace and faith and reasons to believe. And during the table discussion, someone asked me the question, why do you believe? Are you ready for that question? Thankfully, I was. Let me tell you what I told, because it's part of my story. So he said, why do you believe? I said, well, if there were ever people on the face of this earth that knew beyond any shadow of a doubt if Jesus was who he said he was or not, it was the original apostles, the 12 that followed him closely. I mean, they saw him in public. They saw him in private. They heard the teaching. They saw the miracles. They knew. They followed. They committed. They were all in. They had left their previous life. But they saw their leaders conspire with Rome to have this guy that they were following killed. Now remember, they had heard Jesus claim to be the Messiah. And when they saw Jesus come down dead from that Roman cross, they did what every single one of us would have done. They ran to the hills in fear. Because I'm thinking they had to reason, if they kill Jesus, they're coming after me next. And the fact that he's dead, what he told us cannot be true. I mean, the Messiah can't die, can he? So they ran to the hills. I'm guessing that was a long Friday and a long Saturday. But then Sunday came. And when they saw a resurrected Jesus, it rocked their world. It changed everything for them. The fact that they saw Jesus alive proved that everything that he had said to them was true, including him being God. It changed the entire course of direction of their life. So much so that history tells us that the vast majority of them died. They died a martyr's death. Don't miss this. not for what they believed. People die for what they believe every day. The 9/11 hijackers died for what they believed. They died for what they knew. They died for what they had seen. And what happened next? I'm back in the prison now. What happened next, I will never forget. Mark looked at me with eyes as serious as I have ever seen. And in a gang accent said, nobody would die for a scam. Nobody would die for a scam. To which I said, I don't think so either. It's a few hours later that Mark experienced the forgiveness that he thought he was beyond. For the first time in his life, very likely, he experienced grace. Now, I told you, Mark will likely never get out of prison. But I know for a fact that he's a light. He's serving men in the prison. He's a light in one of the darkest places that you can imagine. So, ladies and gentlemen, let there be no doubt. If you are a follower of Jesus, you're the light of the world. So this thing that God called light, I think it's a pretty big deal, don't you? Remember, he said, it is good. It is good. So, at the end of day one, we have the creation of all the basic raw materials of matter. Time, space, and matter. They all exist together. One does not exist without the other. If God were building a house, he would have a lot. 2x4s, shingles, brick, mortar, screws, nails. He would have everything that he needed to construct the house at the end of day one. This is part of the how in God's creation. But most importantly, I think we're learning something about the nature. We're introduced for the first time to our Creator. We see that Elohim is go ahead and jump to the next one. We see that Elohim is Creator. That Elohim has some sort of spirit that energizes all things. And we see that God's Word reveals all things. It's the end of day one, so why does this matter in 2019? I mean, have you ever thought about why God would choose to reveal himself to us? Why does he want us to know him? Well, he wants us to know him deeply and personally. And that's why I think he starts in Genesis 1. One thing about created things, all created things have a purpose. They have a reason that they were created. You know, I believe that the Bible is one story, God's story. From Genesis chapter 3 through the end of Revelation, it's the story of God putting his family back together. He's trying to take us back to the way it was in the Garden of Eden. Back to Eden. And the really great news is God is inviting us to be a part of that story. See, God wants to do more than just redeem you. He wants you to be a part of redeeming the rest of the world. He wants to give your life meaning and purpose. I heard someone say once that the two most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day that you discover why. God is inviting you to discover why. To be part of his plan. His plan to restore the world. To bring the world back to the way he intended it from the very beginning. To a world where kids like Jake Porter score touchdowns. A world that is dominated by love. A world that's dominated by grace. So guys, that's the end of number one. Let me give you a little I want to be really brief here. We're already past 7. I apologize for that. Where we're going. Next week, we're going to take a look at the remaining 5 days of creation. Then we're going to close our Bibles. You don't hear that in church every day. And we're going to take a look at the evidence from science and see where it leads. Then we're going to follow that up the next week. We're going to look at what does it mean to be created in the image of God. And the final week, we're going to look at this idea of where does evil come from and the beginning of God's redemptive plan. Okay. So let me, can I give them homework? Let me give you a little bit of homework. It's easy. One of the core reasons I put this series together is to grow the foundation, the bedrock foundation of our faith. But what I'm finding, it's not a widely held understanding of what faith really is. So here's your challenge. It's 2 parts. One is just write down your own working definition of faith. What is the Christian faith? And then if you want extra credit, come up with 2, maybe 3 examples of what you see people call faith that are not really faith at all. Okay? And that's where we will pick it up next week. All right? Guys, thank you for your attention.